Hi, my name is Paul Cook. I'm one of the founders of the charity Erase Meso, which was set up to raise funds for scientific research into finding a cure for mesothelioma. Probably more importantly, I was diagnosed with pleural mesothelioma in 2017. Now, I've never worked in construction, with asbestos, been in the military, or any of the other workplaces that are more commonly associated with the disease. Now, I was also 45 when diagnosed, so I don't meet any of the stereotypes. Since being diagnosed, I've undergone various treatments, and for the time being, I can say I'm cancer free. I was asked to speak today about my journey since being diagnosed, which obviously I'm more than happy to do, especially if it provides a little bit of hope, which is so lacking with this horrible disease. Now, one thing I would say, it's important to mention that everyone's different and each person will have their own approach. This is just my story and what I did. For the background to this, in 2017, I was running my own business, and ironically, but luckily, I decided to get reasonably fit that year. I was cycling to work 3, 4 times a week. Had started to learn to play tennis and to kite surf. During the summer, I'd completed a couple of cycling challenges. I've been on a pretty active family holiday in September. Now, during the October of 2017, I started to get night sweats, which were odd as I didn't have flu and felt relatively fine the next day. Then I got pain in between my shoulder blades, and it hurt a lot to take a deep breath. Pretty common symptoms I now realise, but at the time I didn't know anything about mesothelioma. But I was working really, really hard at the time, and I thought it was stress. So I carried on working, and I tried to reduce the stress with some exercise, although by now I felt pretty dreadful. So the week before I first ended up in hospital, I cycled about 100 miles, and then the pain got really, really bad. And it was actually my wife who forced me to go to A&E after a big row. I hastened to add that I'd be fine. It turns out, and I had pneumonia, fluid in the lung, and a collapsed lung. Now, following the lung being drained, I had a VATS procedure to reinflate my lung and was sent home to recuperate. I was making great progress physically following the operation and was well ahead of schedule as far as I was concerned. And I had the 2-week follow-up consultation post-operation, I'll never forget, on the 14th of November. And it was in that meeting that I was diagnosed and my life changed forever. In fact, I was told I had some cancerous cells, and at that stage I was pretty pragmatic. I'm positive, to be honest. So I said, okay, so what do we need to do? And they said, we've got something called mesothelioma. I was like, fine, so what do we do? And they said, we're not very good at curing that one. And when I asked what that meant, they said, well, there is no cure. Now, I mean, this couldn't be happening to me. I had a 5-year-old son at the time. And unless you've been through it, no one will truly understand that feeling you get with that kind of prognosis. I was numb, shocked, terrified. Life really had changed forever right at that moment, although it had not even slightly begun to sink in exactly what that meant. We'd been told not to look at the internet. So, as you can imagine, since we got home, my wife was Googling mesothelioma. Frankly, she was desperately trying to find some hope, some good news, which is actually the main reason that I was keen to speak today. I remember her saying things to me like, "Look, I found this person. They've been diagnosed. They were diagnosed a year ago, and they're still alive. I found someone else, and they were diagnosed 2 years ago." I mean, I could have screamed. 2 years. In September, I'd been mountain biking. I've been on holiday. I was running a business, starting to kite surf, and now suddenly I'm told I've got terminal cancer, and people are getting excited about the fact that there's someone else that's still alive 2 years later. All those questions. What am I going to tell my son? What am I going to tell my mother? It can't be true. My son's only 5. All of those things go through your mind. Everything then seemed to happen so slowly and yet so fast. An appointment had already been made for me to see an oncologist. I was starting chemo the following week. There was then a decision whether to have surgery. The process had started, this roller coaster, and I didn't even understand what mesothelioma really was. And I remember the first chemo. I was told it would last a couple of hours. I was terrified following the chemo chat. One thing I would say, I mean, for the medical community, if anyone's watching, is that, that's one thing I'd change tomorrow. I understand that the medical profession has to cover itself in this litigious environment and also prepare patients. But I was being told about side effects that the oncology nurse had never seen in a 25-year career. I mean, I was absolutely terrified. But anyway, my couple of hours of first chemo turned out to be 10.5 hours. I was transferred to a ward. My body reacted really badly to it, and I was hospitalised. Um, must say though, the next day I wasn't too bad. I thought, okay, this is fine. And then of course the steroids wore off. The fog in my head was terrible, and it's something that continued every chemo session. And the fact, and it's something that went on long after the various treatments had stopped. The objective with me was to have 3 rounds of chemo before having surgery, which I decided to have, followed by radiotherapy, and then back onto the chemo. And I was lucky in the end to have responded well to the chemo, as there was a shrinkage of about 30% before surgery. Now, I had an operation to remove the lining of my lung, together with any tumours. This was a pretty terrifying ordeal. One is, will you make it through the operation? And secondly, what will you be like afterwards? And it was around this time, bizarrely, that I decided that if I make it through the surgery, I was going to do 2 things. One, I was going to start a charity to raise funds for research. And the second thing, I was going to cycle the UK, 1,000 miles across the UK. Now, I'm pleased to say, obviously, I made it through the operation, but it was really difficult to prepare for what comes next. It is, without doubt, for me, it was the most painful thing that I've ever been through. But let's be clear, it saved my life. My surgeon and his medical team were amazing, not just in terms of the op, but the way I was looked after for the next few weeks. But it was this time in hospital that I decided I would start training the day I got out and for the rest of my life. Now, again, it's important to mention here that everyone is different, there are different circumstances, everyone's in a different position. This is just what I did. But when I was diagnosed originally, I changed my diet. I started mindfulness to the amazement of everyone around me. I started to exercise to combat the chemo. And then, post surgery, I went through 3 more chemos together with radiotherapy. I reacted really badly to the radiotherapy. I seemed to go downhill with every chemo session, including being hospitalized a few times. But amazingly, I was then given the good news that for the time being, the treatments had worked, and I'm here to tell the tale. Now, although being diagnosed with mesothelioma is awful, I was lucky in some ways. The surgeon who reinflated my lung had a suspicion that it was mesothelioma. She sent my results back to the lab twice to test for meso, because I wasn't in that sort of meso bucket, if you like, due to my work history and age, so they didn't suspect it. I had access to great medical care. My oncologist was and continues to be amazing. I was younger and also had started to get fit. But in terms of my journey, I'd committed early on to do whatever I could to fight this disease. So what did that mean for me? I changed my diet. I don't eat a lot of red meat, for example. I cut out the sugar. I take supplements. I try and get my 5 a day in. I drink green tea. By the way, I still can't stand, but I still do try and drink 4 to 5 cups a day. I've tried to reduce stress in my life, but to be honest, I think that comes with perspective. And I exercise. Now, I committed to exercise when I was diagnosed. I did this from the start, throughout all of the various treatments. During chemo, I had to drag myself out of bed, but I always felt better afterwards. The frustrating thing was that during the treatments, I just got weaker, whatever I did. But when I got home from surgery, I got out of the car, and the first thing I did was walk around the block, albeit very, very slowly. I was with my father-in-law. I almost passed out, but I'd done it. And from then on, every day I would go out for walks, and I'd start with a few hundred steps, building it up to a few thousand, up to 10,000 each day. I then started getting on the bike and trying to do a few miles. I then started working with a physio, which I would definitely recommend to anyone who's being diagnosed, doing Pilates, trying to rebuild some strength. This was a really long process. I mean, at one point I was doing and failing with 1 kilogram weights, much to the amusement of my 5-year-old. Now, in September 29, I mean, what that led to is that myself and a bunch of friends, to whom I will forever be grateful, we cycled the UK just under 1,000 miles in 10 days. Now, what made it all the more special for me is that I'd met another person online in one of the mesothelioma groups who had a terrible prognosis similar to mine. His name is Nigel Shaddick. I was going down the more traditional route, shall we say, in terms of radiotherapy, chemo, surgery, and he was on a trial. I asked him whilst I was in hospital just after surgery whether he'd like to join me. Bizarrely and amazingly, he said yes, and we crossed the finish line together in September 2019. Now, I still train all the time, and most people don't realise what I have to do to live a normal life. I'm lucky because I do live a normal-ish life. But look, if I don't do weights or certain exercises, my right shoulder will drop a few inches and be very painful. If I don't get my lung moving, it hurts and can be difficult to breathe. I still get really bad fatigue, bizarrely about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. But if I get out, I'm able to combat that. I have to work at this and work really hard. But I'm grateful because I'm alive. Life is fairly normal. I'm as active, probably more active than I've ever been. I now ski, kiteboard, cycle. I'm about to start playing tennis again. In fact, there's not much I can't do, but I have to work it. I do between 1 and 2 hours, sort of some sort of exercise or stretching or whatever it means, or whatever a day. For anyone who's recently diagnosed with mesothelioma, it is a terrifying experience for everyone, for patients, for families. All I would say is that there is some hope out there. And since becoming more involved with mesothelioma, there are a number of people out there who have been diagnosed who are beating the statistics. You would have heard from Mavis Nye earlier. I mean, she's a shining example. She's amazing. She was amazing to me when I was diagnosed, kind of matriarch of mesothelioma. She's been fighting this disease for 10 years or more, plus campaigning, plus providing support, plus being mother hen to all of us. An amazing lady. But I'd like to finish with a couple of things. I realise how lucky I am to be here. I have great medical care and support from friends and family. My approach is not the blueprint for what you should do, but I do think that we all need to do everything we can to fight this disease. Lastly, there is so much to do in mesothelioma. One thing that I'm very passionate about, and it's a key objective for our charity, Erase Meso, is to raise awareness about mesothelioma and the dangers of asbestos. One of the issues is that people do not realise it's a problem. When I was diagnosed, I'd never heard of it. My mum still can't pronounce it. She can't spell it. This has got to change. I would ask for your help. Our call to action for anyone touched by mesothelioma is Action Mesothelioma Day 2021. We're planning on having a national event and making it bigger than it's ever been before. And we want to bring the whole community together, whether that be patient, carer, charity, support group, lawyers, people from the asbestos and construction industry. A number of the charities were already in discussion and making plans. And we'd like everyone to come together on this day next year, and there'll be more on this to follow. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you.